Do you believe that a city known as a symbol of freedom could also be the site of one of the most brutal crackdowns in modern Western European history? And what happens when that city's government chooses to bury that story for 40 years? Welcome to our History Channel. Today we uncover the darkness that shrouded the City of Light on the night of October 17, 1961. This is the story of the Paris Massacre of Algerians, a story of 3 individuals, 3 choices, and 40 years of state silence. To understand the night of October 17th, you have to go back 130 years earlier. In 1830, France invaded Algeria, not as a colony, but as French land. Algeria was not governed as a conquered territory. It was absorbed into the legal body of France. Algerians were not recognized as a people. They were treated as subjects to be civilized. In 1954, the Algerian National Liberation Front, the Front de Libération Nationale, launched an armed uprising. The French government did not call it a war, they called it a pacification operation. This is the language of those in power when they want to make violence sound administrative. But when 2 million troops are deployed and more than 300,000 Algerians die over 7 years, whatever you call it, it is still a war. Maurice Papon, the prefect of police of Paris from 1958, is a central figure in this story. And his record is one that can only be described as horrifying in retrospect. 1942 to 1944 signed orders for the arrest and deportation of more than 1,600 French Jews to German concentration camps. Most never returned. 1958, appointed by de Gaulle as prefect of police of Paris, while his Vichy-era crimes had yet to be investigated. 1961, issued a curfew that applied only to Algerians in a city that claimed to be the capital of freedom. Papon was not a monster who suddenly appeared in 1961. He was the product of a system that protected him from 1944 to 1958 and continued to grant him power. The real question is not, who was Papon? It is, what does it say about those who knew his past and still chose to appoint him? To understand why Papon was able to do what he did in 1961, you must understand what happened in 1958. You also have to know what de Gaulle knew when he signed that appointment. In 1958, Papon's past was not entirely a secret. Some high-ranking officials in the government were aware of his role in Bordeaux during the Vichy regime. But after World War II, France adopted an unofficial policy. They would not dig into the past of those who served the Vichy administration as long as they declared loyalty to de Gaulle after 1944. De Gaulle did appoint Papon despite knowing his past. He appointed him because of it. A man who had once signed deportation orders for 1,600 people without hesitation was exactly the kind of man the government needed to handle the Algerian problem. The Algerian people did not know Papon, but they knew the curfew. They knew that only they were forbidden to go out after 8 post-meridium. Not the French, not the Italians, not the Spanish. Only Algerians, in a city they had helped build with their own labor over years. Amar Ouammara, a small figure in this story, was one of them, a construction worker. But in Paris, no one asked who you were. They only saw that you were Algerian. And in Paris, in 1961, that alone was enough to make you a threat. The Front de Libération Nationale in France called on Algerians to protest the curfew on the night of October 17th. And this is the most important detail to understand. They did not take to the streets to fight. More than 30,000 Algerians, men, women, and children poured into the streets of Paris from all directions. They marched in silence, with discipline, dressed as if attending an important event. This was a carefully prepared demonstration and entirely peaceful. They took to the streets to demonstrate their dignity. They faced a government that was treating them as enemies. Amar was one of them, just one among thousands that night. 7 post-meridium. Amar leaves his small room in the suburb of Nanterre. He is wearing his best suit, the one he only puts on for truly important occasions. On the train, he recognizes others by the way they are dressed. Their clothes are more formal than usual, and their shoes are carefully polished. An old man clutches his beret tightly, his eyes both determined and afraid. They do not speak much, but they all know why they are dressed this way. The tragedy is that dignity did not protect them. Papon was prepared. Thousands of police officers and riot police, the Compagnies Républicaines de Sécurité, were positioned at strategic points. The bridges over the Seine, major squares, key intersections. They were not deployed to maintain order. They were deployed to block and crush. Paris that night was not a city. It was a trap mapped out in advance in a command room. Some groups of demonstrators were surrounded as soon as they reached the Opéra Square. Others were blocked on the bridges over the Seine. Pont de Neuilly, Pont de Clichy, Pont Saint-Michel. In front of them were police, behind them were police. There was no escape. Amar stands still and listens. The sound of thousands of footsteps on the cobblestone streets. The cold scent of the Seine rising from beneath the bridges. The beams of police flashlights sweeping across the crowd, not to search, but to select. What happened next was described by numerous witnesses, including Algerian survivors, French bystanders, and foreign journalists. They all described the same thing: French police attacking an unarmed crowd. The level of violence could not be explained as self-defense by anyone who witnessed it. Batons and rifle butts came down indiscriminately. Those standing still were beaten to the ground. Those fleeing were struck from behind. Women were beaten. Those trying to shield children were beaten. At the Opera Square, demonstrators were pushed inward while police struck the crowd from three sides. Some tried to flee into nearby buildings for shelter. French restaurant owners and residents pulled them inside, shut the doors, and listened to the pounding from outside. Amar tries to run. There is nowhere to run. He falls when someone shoves him hard from behind. The cold stone pavement beneath his palms. The smell of blood metallic mixed with the scent of fresh dye from his newly cleaned suit. That is the last thing he remembers before being pulled up and pushed into a truck, and he never returns. This is the part that many mainstream historical accounts still avoid. It is not because of a lack of evidence, but because it is too difficult to confront. On several bridges over the Seine, Algerians were bound with their hands behind their backs. They used rope, electrical wire, or whatever was available, and then threw them into the river. Not one person, not in panic. According to multiple testimonies, systematically, repeatedly, while others were held and made to wait their turn. In October, the Seine is cold. Those thrown in with their hands tied could not swim. Their bodies were found in the days and weeks that followed. They were drifting along the Seine, washing ashore, with some discovered dozens of kilometers from Paris. Tying victims' hands before throwing them into the river proves this was a calculated execution. When I first read this detail in declassified records, it sent a chill through me. This was not because I did not know human beings could be cruel, but because of what the act required. Someone had to stop, take out the rope, bind each person's hands, and only then throw them into the water. That is not loss of control. That is a choice. That night, the Seine did not only carry away bodies, it carried away the honor of the French justice system. It carried away a question that France would take 50 years to dare to ask. Those not killed in the streets or thrown into the river were taken to temporary detention sites. These included the Palais des Sports, the Vincennes camp, and the basement of the Paris police headquarters. This last site, located on the Ile de la Cité in the middle of the Seine, just steps from Notre Dame, is the most extensively documented. There, the detainees continued to be beaten. Later investigations recorded testimonies from dozens of survivors describing the same scene. They were thrown into dark basements, beaten with batons and rifle butts, and given no water, food, or permission to contact their families. Thousands were held under those conditions. They faced no charges, had no legal procedure, and no information was given to their families waiting at home. Some were released after a few days, some were deported back to Algeria immediately, and some, the number remains disputed, never returned. On the morning of October 18th, Parisians opened their newspapers. The French government announced that there had been clashes between police and Algerian demonstrators the night before. The official death toll, 2 to 3 people, while bodies were still drifting along the Seine. That morning, Amar's wife in Kabylie woke up and waited for a telegram, but it never came. She did not know who to ask. Asking could bring trouble upon the family. That is what the number 2 to 3 deaths can never tell. When you turn 200 lives into the number 2, you kill them a second time, this time in the pages of history. And the silence of the state is never neutral. It protects the perpetrators, strips victims of the ability to be acknowledged, and sends a message to the future. This can be repeated without consequence. In modern Western European history, there are few nights when state violence was carried out so openly, and yet disappeared from public memory for 40 years. Algerian witnesses were threatened or deported before they could tell their stories to any investigative body. Families of the missing were repeatedly denied information by the police. Dozens of Algerian families in Paris lost loved ones that night, people who went out to protest and never returned. The truth began to emerge thanks to one man, the historian Jean-Luc Enodi. In 1991, after years of archival research and interviews with hundreds of witnesses, he published La Bataille de Paris. When the book appeared, Papon threatened to sue him for defamation. Papon lost. The court ruled that what Enodi wrote was true. In 1997, Papon stood trial in Bordeaux, not for Paris 1961, but for the Jews he had deported in 1942. Convicted of complicity in crimes against humanity, he died in 2007 without ever being tried for the events of October 17th. Not a single person involved that night was prosecuted for the death of any Algerian. Amago Amara's wife in Kabylie kept his suit in the wardrobe for many years afterward. No one was allowed to put it away. Not because she was waiting for him to return, she knew he would not. But because as long as the suit remained there, Ama was still remembered in that house. His name does not appear in any official records of France. The number 2 to 3 deaths never included him. But he was there. He put on his best suit and took the train toward the city center. And he never came back. And Ama was only one among many victims of that repression. It took 51 years. In 2012, 51 years later, President Hollande became the first French leader to officially acknowledge that this was a crime committed by the French police. And on the Pont de Bourdon, one of the bridges of that night, there is a small memorial plaque. Not erected by the French government, but by human rights activists and the descendants of those who died there. Simple, unadorned, but it is there. The Seine still flows, the Eiffel Tower still lights up every night. And for most people who pass by, the night of October 17, 1961 does not exist. This is not because it did not happen, but because no one ever told them about it. This is what I want to say clearly in this video. History is not only what is written in textbooks. History is also what people deliberately erase. The blank spaces, the sealed pages, the numbers that are never fully counted. And those blanks are not neutral. They are decisions. Maurice Papon was not tried for what he did in 1961. He was tried for what he did in 1942, and only after 43 years. That gap between the crime and accountability is not accidental. It is the result of hundreds of small decisions made by hundreds of people, in government, in newsrooms, and in the judicial system. These people chose not to open the files, not to ask questions, and not to confront what was uncomfortable. The Seine may wash away blood, but it cannot erase the truth if we choose to look for it. What do you think about how a nation confronts its own dark past? And what is the cost of not confronting it, not only for the victims, but for that society in the long run? Please like and subscribe to the channel to keep exploring the hidden corners of history that textbooks don't tell you about.